Adult Protective Service referrals for seniors who were potential victims of financial abuse increased nearly 40% from 2011 to 2014. The increase in cases referred can be attributed in part to a new law requiring banks to report suspected financial abuse. We're going to talk about that and more coming up next on Connecting Our Community. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Connecting Our Community. It's part 2 of a show on elder abuse. We have 2 members of the State's Attorney's Office here to talk about it with us. For one, we have Debbie Feinstein, and again, the titles. My goodness, if you saw the part 1, I struggled with these titles, but I'll do it again because they're really important. So Debbie Feinstein is Senior Assistant State's Attorney, Chief of the Family Violence Division, and Co-Chief of the Crimes Against Seniors and Vulnerable Adult Unit. And then there's Brian Roslin, the Chief of the Special Prosecutions Division and Co-Chief of Crimes Against Seniors and Vulnerable Adults Unit. You know what? It'll be easier to understand what this show is exactly about, thanks to these 2. But basically, we've been talking in part 1 about elder abuse, financial-wise, physical-wise, all kinds of abuse of the elder and vulnerable population. Take it away, guys. Okay, so we're back. Thank you for staying with us and enduring all that. What are the main types of abuse, just to go over a couple of real quick things that we went over in part 1, in case people missed it?
Sure. The broad categories of abuse are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or psychological abuse, and financial exploitation. Then there's also neglect. Okay. And Brian Roslin, you can talk a lot more about the financial part that we promised in part 1, that the State's Attorney's Office is pursuing. And what do you mean by financial exploitation?
So financial exploitation of seniors, we basically categorize it in a very technical definition called taking money from seniors. And so it's a really complicated thing. The ways that happens, the way seniors lose their money or are victimized that way, that can become a little bit more complex. But the broad category is just taking money or property that belongs to a senior, and it happens in all kinds of different ways. As we talked a little bit before, trusted people are one category, family and friends and caregivers, and then strangers are the other category of people that will take the money if they can figure out some way to do it. And the strangers include the door-to-door people that just knock on the doors, include the ones that call on the telephone. Usually they call many, many, many times, as well as
they call everybody.
Yes, they do.
Unfortunately, the senior might be the person to answer the phone out of a variety of reasons and get taken.
Yeah, and so that's certainly one of the reasons why seniors often are targeted by some of these people, is because they come from a generation still that was raised on being polite and being courteous to people. And so the idea of when somebody wants to talk to you, a complete stranger wants to talk to you about your money, of hanging up the phone, it's just not something that comes natural to seniors.
Can you give a few examples of some of these financial type of crimes that are committed against, not always maybe prosecutable, because you can't always catch them.
Some are, but some are.
But you're going for it.
Sure.
Yeah.
One that we prosecuted recently in Montgomery County is what we refer to as woodchuck cases. And these are the people that come around. They're very seasonal. In the fall, they're going to rake your leaves. In the winter, they're going to shovel your driveway. In the spring and summer, they're going to see things that are matter with your trees that need to have work done on them. The one we prosecuted was roofing, that they came and knocked on the door of the senior's house and said, hey, your roof looks like it's in trouble. $17,000 later, she had the exact same roof that she had before, but these people came back 3 different times to collect checks saying, well, we're going to do the work. Always some excuse for why the work is not getting done. All of it, of course, fraud. No intention ever to do any of the work. None of them are licensed contractors. None of them have bonds or are parts of real companies that are backing them. And so.
And how old was the senior?
That one I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. I believe she was 80 or so. But she also, while not diagnosed with dementia, had the signs the things that come often with aging, not quite the capacity to understand the finances anymore. And it was only when one of her children saw the checkbook and realized what are these checks for that it was discovered at that point.
That has to be the most heartbreaking thing.
It is very difficult that
'Cause
way.
it was
Yeah.
on the son or daughter who felt so guilty as well. But I
Right.
mean, and then you start to see, sometimes you start to see with seniors that the cognitive awareness goes just down slightly, just enough for it to be vulnerable. I
Right.
think that's what you're dealing with here a lot,
Yes.
in a lot of cases.
Very regular.
Something else that you all mentioned was the fact that seniors in a certain generation that there is now tend to hide things and don't want necessarily to tell about, to speak up about them, which is a serious problem.
I mean, I think it's a common thing, really just a human thing to be embarrassed or ashamed if you can't remember something, or if you're feeling that you're losing some of your capacity, or that you feel like maybe you're being taken advantage of, but you don't want to tell anyone. There's a lot of embarrassment and shame that surrounds that, and frankly, at any age, but particularly because of the capacity issues as people age and become more advanced in age. So. It's an issue. People don't want, they don't necessarily want to share that or, talk about it or talk about their finances or talk about what's going on.
But you're here to tell them to speak up, right?
Absolutely.
Because people, like you said, don't do that. And one thing that would help your units a lot to grab some of these bad people in the community and relatives is for the person to speak up.
Yes.
Yes, and I mean, I think you had mentioned a statistic, only 1 in 44 cases of financial exploitation of seniors is actually reported. So there are 43 people out there, the other 43 that haven't reported, so we're not catching the people that are perpetrating the scams or the exploitation on the seniors because it's never getting reported.
And that could be one reason why it's not reported, because they're in hiding. But what are some others?
As far as reasons why it's not reported?
Yeah, because these are criminal.
Sure, and the loss of control is often a big issue with seniors, that I don't want to get out of my house, I don't want to lose that ability to drive, and so the fear that comes
Independence.
with, exactly, the loss of that independence, and so the fear that comes with, I've been victimized, if I tell, I'm going to that nursing home where I really don't want to go to. And so it's that kind of fear that is lurking about them that it contributes to it. It's the shame of not wanting to do it, particularly if it's a family member, if their own child that they have raised
Right.
is victimizing them.
Right.
So the
Ugh.
shame is something that they don't want to touch on. But there are also, you have to acknowledge, as seniors decline and their capacity to process things is declining, the ability to sort out exactly how do I report this, particularly for some of the internet scams. Understanding that, I have been victimized,
Right.
doesn't come quite so quickly to register that. And so that can contribute as well to why people may not report.
And one of the things that we're doing is actually, I know you have mentioned that, basically you call the Adult Protective Services. That is the sort of one-stop
talked about that in
shop.
part
We
one.
talked about that in
Yeah.
part
We're going to say it
one.
again in part 2.
And I just said it again,
Yeah.
and I also wanted to tell people they can look out on the Ride on Buses. There's a campaign that's
that's
going
good,
that's going to
yeah.
have the number for Adult Protective Services literally driving by in the streets in Montgomery County, so
And
that
we
people can know, what to do and have it not be, so hidden.
We can remind people right now what that number is. 240 777
3000.
3000.
240-777-3000. Of course, 911 would be somebody seeing something and reporting something immediately,
Right.
which is super important.
And I
yeah.
think, it's interesting when we talk about sort of this embarrassment or the shame or this wanting to hide. I mean, I think, particularly in a county like Montgomery County where we have, pockets of affluence, I think it's even harder for people to report, not only because of the embarrassment and the shame, but because, how could this be happening to them? And I think what the messaging is and what the message is, that this happens across the board. It doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter how much money, it doesn't matter what your religion. Statistically, nationwide, the prevalence of elder abuse is the same, regardless interestingly, yes.
Regardless of culture, background, ethnicity, or anything.
Now the reporting rates differ, depending, because people that live in certain situations where they may be co-located or maybe more visible or things like that, you're going to see a higher reporting rate. Someone that lives in a single-family home that's being victimized, I think you're going to be less likely to know it because you don't have someone living in the apartment next door or the townhouse next door. So
Right.
you may see different reporting rates that way. But no, it happens everywhere. Don't get me wrong. There's most people are good.
Right.
But it's being aware of the fact that not everyone is, and you need to be on the lookout for someone that may be trying to take advantage of your parent, or family member, or you.
There's an annual day once a year, and it has a long name, the Elder and Vulnerable Adult Abuse Awareness Day.
World
Every June 15th.
World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
Oh my goodness. Okay, it's
Yes.
World,
Elder, yes.
and that's usually June 15th every year, correct?
That's correct. We do an event in Montgomery County somewhere around the date of June 15th where we bring together community leaders and vendors and people to really bring out information, again, all around the idea of education and prevention. And we typically offer a workshop that's really specifically geared in a much more in-depth way than Brian and I can really do today, to talking about what are those signs of financial exploitation, and to have the attendees really interact and be a part of sort of decision making and discovery through the workshop.
I think it's a wonderful idea, and I know
Yes.
it needs to be promoted a lot more. So hopefully this will
Right.
help. It's
I hope so.
it's
Yeah.
every year around June 15th, and it's called World Elder and Vulnerable Adult Abuse Awareness Day, right? Close enough?
Close enough.
Yeah, it's usually just the short
dear.
pieces. Yeah, to
We
talk-
call it WEAD.
We
Yeah.
add. There you
There you
go.
go.
Yeah, but you had asked about some of the things about characteristics of the crimes that are there, and I think one of the things that it's helpful for people to start to understand is the techniques that are used in financial crimes are the same types of techniques that you see everywhere, and people look at advertisements and they register, oh, that's just an ad, they're just trying to sell me something, but they don't realize it's those same type of techniques that go into what the con artists are trying to do. And some of those techniques are scarcities. You remember, this sale is only going to
Right,
happen for a
right.
couple of
Yep,
days,
yep.
but you know that the merchant's going to have another sale next month to do that. The same type of thing, the con artists will try to get you to make a decision
Right.
really quick like that, but in reality, you don't have to make it
That's
that
even
way.
hard, if you're someone not elderly, it's
Absolutely.
hard to think on your feet like that.
Yeah,
you
but
know.
that's the techniques that are one of the techniques that are used. Certainly, another one that we see regularly in is the trusted person. So you hear it all the time. Somebody who's famous is touting on the television, buy this product. Well, it works the same way with con artists. They come in and say, I've been in this business for 15 years, or I've done this for 20 years, or this is the 10,000th house. Yours would be the 10,000th job that I would do
Right.
of this. And so what they're doing is conditioning your mind to trust that way. And so raising awareness of seniors, oh, wait a minute, that's just a con to bring down my guard, is part of the types of things that we try to educate people about.
Thank you. When we come back, I want to talk about the law with the bank requiring the banks to report, so we get a little more security for
understand
the
it,
elders
yeah.
in that one.
Right.
Stay tuned. There's more. Don't go away.
When you donate goods in response to an international disaster, it's expensive.
They have to cross the sea, pass through customs, be inspected, sorted, then finally delivered.
And often they arrive too late to help, making your good intentions feel a little empty.
There is a better way.
Cash donations are fast, simple, and allow professional relief workers to purchase supplies close at hand.
Cash is best. Learn more at CIDI.org.
It's our duty to serve veterans and military families who serve their country in the most difficult ways imaginable. Together, we can say thank you in so many ways. Small acts of kindness mean more than anything. With our support, veterans and military families can face even the most difficult challenges. Let's honor their service with ours.
We are back, part 2 here of Connecting Our Community, talking about elder abuse, financial, physical, all kinds of ways. And we're talking with 2 members of the state's attorney's office who are, wow, giving us a lot of information on what's going on out there and how much effort the new unit has been making to target those who are being abused one way or another. One thing I wanted to mention is that I mentioned before the break, the banks are now required to do what?
Yes, Maryland law changed a
Brian.
couple of years ago, and so now if a bank employee suspects that there may be financial exploitation happening, meaning that they think a senior is being taken advantage of, they're now required to make a report, and the law provides a couple of different places they can do it. In Montgomery County and really almost all of Maryland, the banks report it to Adult Protective Services. So that's a change. In the past, banks did not have to report. A few did. The law, of course, carries with it protections for the banks that they can't be sued for disclosing to Adult Protective Services the suspicion of it. And likewise, the banks cannot be compelled to tell a family member that, yes, we reported something to Adult Protective Services. So it's a helpful piece. We like to think of it in terms of that one of the things it is showing is that there's an increasing awareness in all facets of our lives and of our community that, hey, exploitation of seniors and abuse of seniors is a problem, and we need to take more steps to try to do it. It adds another set of eyes from the bankers to be watching that way.
What other steps could we take?
So there's a whole other variety of them. The biggest one is talking, and if you want to talk more about that. But
Sure. I mean, the biggest one is communicating and making sure that, you know, if something doesn't seem right, that it's being brought to, you know, attention, and you're paying attention to your neighbors, to your family members, that sort of thing,
Right.
and making sure that you're communicating about irregularities, essentially, things, you know, change in routine, things that just seem off. And not to hesitate to notify Adult Protective Services, and if it's nothing, it's nothing. But you know, I think
Safer
that
than sorry. Better
safe,
than-
right? Err on the side of reporting is what I like to say.
And we talk about it as have the big circle of consultants. So when you get that telephone call that says, guess what, you've won the Jamaican lottery and you've never entered it, talk to your neighbor. And lo and behold, your neighbor got the same phone call. They
Right.
won the lottery. And talk to the next neighbor. And they won. And pretty soon you realize, oh, wait, we didn't win this lottery. It's a scam. The grandparents scam, which calls up and says, hey, it's your favorite grandson. I'm in jail. Call up the grandson. Don't rely on these phones. So talk to those
Yeah.
people around and expand and ask things. If somebody comes to you with a new financial product, don't just take their word for it. Ask the people you've been playing mahjong with for 40 years.
Yeah.
Ask them, have you heard about these kind of things? So that's by far the biggest step that people can do. Another very important thing on financial things is never ever rush into anything. There is no such
That's for
thing.
everyone.
Absolutely for everyone.
Impulsiveness is a nightmare.
Yes. And
Easily
so-
regrettable.
And so the people that tell you you've got to act now, find whatever ways you can do to train yourselves not to respond to that. Act now. That's a classic red flag. We want you to do it now. Another classic red flag is don't tell anybody. And so this is the grandparent scam, which gets lots of publicity, so I go back to that one. But the other ones that talk about investments, this is a secret thing only for a few people. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Those are classic signs that something is wrong here. And so if you come back to that big circle of consultants, those people that you're reaching out to talk about it, that's one of the best ways to protect
Right.
yourselves and protect your neighbors from these kind of crimes.
Yeah, and we want to say again, most people are good. This is depressing. Most people are good, but you
Yes.
still got to watch. I don't want to leave you guys in a complete depression.
Yes.
But you got to take care of your relatives in a good way.
Yes.
A few years ago, there was this horrific case where the handyman that worked for this elderly woman for a very long time took one of the checks and then added the zero. Do you remember that case?
Those are very common, yes.
Oh my goodness!
yeah.
And I think he murdered her in the end. It was a horrific case. It was in the papers. Unfortunately, the papers, you know, that's where we pay attention when it's these
Yes.
awful, awful things.
We both know the case very well.
Yes.
So
Yeah, it was
yeah.
horrible. But that's what we want to warn people about, because
Right,
that
it still
person
goes
had
on.
ingratiated himself as a handyman or took care of the lawn, whatever he did, and then he added zeros to the checks, and then
Right.
that's how it was figured out of it.
Sure, a
You guys know
classic-
better than I do,
A
but
classic trusted person
Right.
that gets into it that way and then realizes, uh-oh, when I'm caught, makes very rash decisions and unfortunate decisions to get out from it.
do you approach different groups different ways, different areas of the county, or different?
So I mean, I think You mean in terms of how we message to different
Yeah,
groups?
yeah.
I mean, I think there are different messages based on, are we speaking to caregivers? Are we speaking to family members? Are we speaking to seniors themselves? I think you pointed out before, 65, you may address a group of, 65 to 75-year-olds different than you may address a group of, 85 to 95-year-olds.
Right.
So I think, yes, but in terms of the messaging, it's the same. I mean, whether we're talking to
And race as well?
race, religion,
Culture,
cultural
we mentioned-
differences. I mean,
yeah.
I think that there's, there may be things that are specific to a particular culture or, things that may be more ingrained or, sort of traditionally ingrained. But by and large, it's really the same mechanisms that are used in order to ingratiate, to get into someone's life, to be in a position to take advantage of them.
And as you all said, the reporting, the statistics of actual the crime is the same with across all.
Across
the
different
board.
groups,
Which
yeah.
I find stunning. I
Yeah.
can't believe that, but
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
bad people are just everywhere.
It is, well, and the way to think about it is, in any bushel of apples, there's one or two that aren't good, and that has been that way through all of time, and
And it's all kinds of apples.
yes,
Which
it
is,
is, and so it is difficult that way to work through. So.
Right. I mean, I think the famous case out of New York with Brooke Astor. I mean,
Right.
that's sort
Yeah,
of
oh my
a
goodness.
famous case
Yeah.
where really this person of great means was taken great advantage of, and
Right.
was ultimately a family member, ultimately
Right,
prosecuted,
right.
and this was someone that was incredibly wealthy. So whatever, so she lost X number of dollars,
Right.
but it was a huge sum, totally unfair, unjust, and the other thing that I think is, important is that when people realize they're getting taken advantage of, it has a significant impact on their physical and mental health.
That's
And,
important.
And
Sure.
so, once they realize they've been scammed, it actually, there's studies that talk about the deterioration of that
Mm-hmm.
person. So we're not just talking about in the moment physical health, we're talking about sort of, longevity really. And someone that gets taken advantage of, we unfortunately see that sort of their world deteriorates.
Yeah,
and
you,
so we want to
feel
protect
so
people from that.
violated, and
Yes.
and when you're elderly and your life is rather limited anyway, considering the facts of being older, that must be horrible.
It's a different piece, yeah. It was when I first saw that number, to realize, somebody has measured this and realized that the victims of physical or financial abuse do have a shorter life expectancy, and that's a sad thing
so
in our
sad.
community. So that's why we're working hard to try to get the message out of ways to prevent and ways to stop, and that's why certainly the perpetrators we can catch in our community, we prosecute them as best we can.
Does it take a long time to prosecute? Does it? I mean, the investigation itself, God knows,
Right.
connecting bank statements and
Right.
witnesses and relatives, and then
Sure.
trying to figure it out must take forever. So
Right, and we talked before in part one about the task force, and one of the great advantages of the elderly and vulnerable adult task force is Adult Protective Services can be working on getting guardians in places for both property and people to make life better for the senior right now. Because you're right, it does take time to subpoena documents and to follow the trail of money. Sometimes for some of these people, it takes time to catch them, find where they are, and bring them back. So the court process can take a while. It sometimes can take a year or so to go from a time a crime occurs until it actually gets to court.
what would you say you have a pretty good success rate so far?
Oh, sure.
Whatever pretty good is.
However you measure
Wanna
success rate,
throw,
it is.
throw, on, throw out some
sure.
percentages. I mean,
Yeah.
relative to the cases you get, how many are, finished off with a guilty verdict, and penalties or whatever?
I mean, I think
What's
it's
the
hard. I think
percentage?
it's hard to quantify, but
Right.
we're very deliberate and thorough in the cases
get
that
your
we
facts.
bring forward. And we don't rush to justice, and we make sure that we have what we need. And I would say that, that's sort of across the board in the state's attorney's office,
Right.
that we try to put the best case forward, and even if that takes some additional time. And unfortunately, in the cases of physical abuse and neglect, often the senior has passed away before the case comes
Yeah.
to prosecution. So we have a lot of techniques that we use in terms of preserving evidence, doing recordings and other things, so that the jury can see the real victim. So this was a real person that was victimized, in this awful way. And we haven't talked in any great depth about the physical abuse, but some of it's just horrible, and the horrors of what someone else will allow to happen to a human being can just be
It is
devastating.
unbearable, because just reading in the papers, terrible, terrible things, terrible neglect, terrible abuse, and just the mental, health of the senior would be seriously compromised at that point
But
as well.
the cases present particular challenges. If you have a senior victim who is fairly far along after several strokes and can't communicate very well,
yeah.
how do you prove that a particular
Right.
injury like a broken arm came from being grabbed and thrown versus just a fall?
Right.
And those become very, very difficult
Complicated.
cases.
You
Yes,
got
and
your
so-
work cut out for
Right,
you.
as Debbie talked about, it takes a lot of careful investigation to be able to put those things together, but those are realities of challenges that come up in actually successfully getting to a guilty verdict.
Right.
Right, and
All
working
right.
with specially trained medical professionals and that sort of thing who specialize in geriatrics to make sure we're getting the correct and most clear information across to the jury.
Before we run, just go down quickly, some quick red flags to leave people in part 2. We mentioned them in part 1, but just what are some quick red flags to look for? Obviously, trust your gut if something's wrong. You've
Right.
made that clear.
You see it-
something out of, right.
Right, you see a change, a dramatic change, or not even dramatic, but you see subtle or changes in someone's routine. They used to go to a weekly card game and they're not, going to that weekly card game anymore to play bridge or whatever it is, that the person does. Or they
Physical
used to have
hygiene.
or physical decline in physical
The house
hygiene.
is not clean,
Exactly, the house not clean, unexplained bruises or burns or welts or breaks or fractures, things like that are obvious signs. But honestly, the hygiene is a big one, or the change in routine. Usually we used to have lunch every Tuesday, and now suddenly, my friend is saying, I'm not available on Tuesday. Well, why aren't they available? Dig deeper. Find out what's going on, communicate,
Yeah.
As Brian had talked about
So
before.
don't hesitate, communicate.
Right.
Let's
And-
give the number for Adult Productive Services again. I know it by heart by this point, 240-777-3000. Brian, you wanted to say?
I was just going to add to it that one of the changes to watch for is the new people that show up, so that if a son or daughter suddenly appears who's never been around before, or a complete stranger starts showing up and being involved in a senior's life, that's one of the other signs of potential for abuse.
Okay, so if you or someone else is in immediate danger, of course, call 911. That would be abundantly clear, so I should not neglect to mention that. Then, again, Adult Protective Services is open 24 hours a day for your phone call, 240-777-3000. There's also the non-emergency number for police, which is 301-279-8000. Those numbers, write them down. They should help you. And, of course, you can always, I guess they can contact the State's Attorney's Office. If
Absolutely.
they have a phenomenal case, or even if they don't, if they suspect something, they can contact you.
240-777-7300. They can call the state's attorney's office and ask to speak to someone that's associated with the elder abuse unit.
Okay,
And we're happy to help.
240-777.
7300.
7300. Okay, so once again, 240-777-3000 is Adult Protective Services, and they're 24 hours a day. All right, so you guys can visit the Connecting Our Community blog at mymcmedia.org. If you want to watch part 1, part 2, you can watch the shows online. They will be airing many, many times. And of course, you can contact the State's Attorney's Office. Brian Roslin, Debbie Feinstein, thank you so much from the State's Attorney's Office. Keep doing the work you're doing. Thank you for joining us on Connecting Our Community. I'm Karen Allen, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.